Morning, gents. How are we all?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Good. So this morning we've got Brendon Cross of STL, Charlie Shillito, and Nick Humphreys of Penningtons Manches Cooper. We're going to be talking about the ESL, or what was for a very brief period of time the ESL, and the debacle that followed the announcement a week ago. Gents, what was, in your opinion, well, just quickly give us a bit of background about each of you and where you are in the world of football. Charlie, you instigated this discussion, so it's right that you tell us all about your love of Man United. Already.
Yeah, so my background is that I'm a season ticket holder at one of the offending clubs, Man United, and have been going since I was about 6 years old. I am from a legal background, so I'm a solicitor in litigation. But probably my involvement in this discussion is more personal, and I guess, there are many very interesting legal aspects that have come out of this, but that's probably more Nick's ballpark than mine.
And thanks for that introduction into Nick. Nick, so you've got a foot in both camps, if you like. You're a football fan of sorts, and you're also heavily involved in football in the day job. So tell us a bit more about you.
Okay, so as regards to the day job, I'm a partner at Penningtons Manches Cooper. I'm a partner in the employment and sports teams, and in the sports team, I'm the co-head of the football group. And as has been indicated, I support an amazing football team that is resplendent in hoops called Queen's Park Rangers.
And for those of you who haven't heard of Queen's Park Rangers, it's field in Shepherd's Bush, as Oxford is just next to Bicester Village. And over to you, Brendon Cross from STL. Good of you to join us.
Good to be here. Brendon Cross, STL. Also got a couple of other business interests, and I suffer an affliction that is Oxford United. I was a director for a number of years. I continue to be a fan. Maybe some directors and ownership will come and go, but some of us will still be there as fans. I was also there in 1986 when we humiliated QPR 3-1 in the Milk Cup.
I felt a lot of sympathy that day, particularly for poor old Jim Smith, but they just didn't turn up. But let's move on. Let's talk about the debacle that was the ESL rather than Rangers' 1986 Milk Cup performance. Charlie, it was an almighty screw up. We could use a much stronger word, but as they go, it was pretty horrendous. A lot of, listen to a lot of media talking about it, and those involved, people were saying, well, these guys know what they're doing. They'd have got their ducks in a row. This can't fail. You've got the biggest guns in European football around the table. This is going to happen. And then one went, two went, and the whole thing fell apart. Although there are a couple hanging on in there still saying it will happen. But for you, what was the biggest mistake that the instigators, the greedy 12, made with the ESL?
Well, like you say, I mean, if we're going to believe what Gary Neville says, then it was, supposedly the death of English football, which is possibly a bit extreme. But I think, from my perspective, the biggest mistake was the amazing lack of awareness of the owners who made these decisions of what their staff and their fan base wanted. They clearly hadn't got their ducks in a row. When it was leaked what was happening, I mean, the context behind that halfway through a Manchester United game, and then the manager gets asked about it afterwards and has no idea. It was embarrassing. And I suppose one of the key points you could take away from that really is that they just clearly, the important people inside the club below the owners had no idea this was going on, it appears. There's obviously debates around whether people like Ed Woodward knew, but if you look at this in a business context, this debacle could have been avoided by actually consulting stakeholders within the business and consulting with the fans. In the end, what they were doing was they were agreeing to enter a league that, unbeknown to them, the people within their own business and their customers didn't want them to join.
And Brendon, you know, when we talked about this beforehand, you were saying that the underestimating the reaction of the fans was the big cross in the box that undermined the whole plan.
I think so. Yeah, I agree with Charlie entirely that the failure of the clubs. I mean, at first glance, the failure of the clubs was to consult with their customers. But in actual fact, if you consult with your stakeholders first, then you probably don't get as far as your customers and needing to do that bit, because I think they'd have learned fairly quickly that it was probably a non-starter. Having said that, I don't think the idea is dead, and I don't just mean because a couple of the teams are still hanging on in there. I think there is a degree of merit for some change. You know, one thing for sure, none of the clubs want to get on a flight midweek and go to Dinamo Zagreb or go to CSK Moscow or somewhere like that. And those games are not they're not attractive to TV in any way, shape, or form. You know, the TV wants the games like Paris Saint-Germain and Man City last night because it's going to be a good game. It's two very glamorous teams, and for Man City, that's a short hop. It's actually quicker to get to Paris on an aeroplane than it is to get to Newcastle for someone that's in London. So it's partly about that, but it's mainly about the money. So I wouldn't write it off. I think there will be a change, and I think, you know, you could look at it and say that possibly the clubs, or that the ownership of some of the clubs, which isn't, you know, there are not too many Anglo-Saxons in ownership of the clubs that we're talking about. I've put the stake right over here somewhere, and that in actual fact there will be perhaps a compromise at some point in the future. Controversial, I know that is, but I think there will probably be some change.
There has to be, I think. It's stirred up enough discussion, and that it can't obviously stay as it is. And Nick, going on from what Charlie was saying about underestimating the reaction of, you know, referenced the Man United manager, players, media, that was severely underestimated. Was it a surprise to you how they underestimated that reaction?
Yeah, I mean, to put everything into context, a couple of years ago, I acted for a chief executive of a Premier League club. And one of the points that he made to me during the year or so that we were dealing with each other was that, and he made it repeatedly, is that football is like no other business. And I'll come back to that later on. But what was going on was that football clubs are essentially reliant on two key groups of employees, and that's the playing staff and the management and coaching staff. Now, what goes on with most Premier League clubs is that despite the profit and sustainability rules, the financial fair play provisions, salaries at Premier League clubs are in the order of 70% of revenue. Okay, and with championship clubs, it's higher. And recently, one of the championship clubs posted a figure for the 2019-2020 financial year, showing salaries being 211% of revenue, which is just astonishing. And what we've got to remember is that most of that is going on the players, because without the players, you can't achieve anything. And what happens with the players is that they're heavily incentivized through bonuses. So it's bonuses for league position, bonuses for position in cup competitions, bonuses for European places, and sometimes also bonuses for international appearances. And what would have happened with the Super League. And what we've got to remember is that it was actually the Super League, not the European Super League, because the idea was that with the initial what were going to be the 15 founders, they were going to feed into a much bigger World Super League. So it was going to be a club World Cup was ultimately the proposal behind it. And what would have happened with the players is that the reaction of FIFA and UEFA was that the players and anyone involved with the competition would have been banned from FIFA competitions. So that's the World Cup and from UEFA competition. So that's things like the Champions League, and also the Premier League said that the players would have been banned from their competition. So the effect on the players is that they're instantly losing out in connection with the bonuses they got, and for those of the players, which the 12 clubs that we're talking about it contain a lot of international players, they'd have been banned from the World Cup. Which is particularly important to a lot of players. So what happened with the players is that in return for what would have been almost certainly a renegotiated contract, giving them payments, higher payments, but also subject to a salary cap in the Super League. It was proposed that the salary cap would operate at 55% of revenue, providing more profits to the owners. The players, many of whom only stay at those sorts of clubs for 3 or 4 years, would be giving up their entire playing career because they'd have been banned. So against that backdrop, and the fact that this was the biggest media story in connection with football for 30 years, I don't think it's any surprise whatsoever that there was no buy-in from the players, and that was absolutely evident. And once the players and the media had picked up on this, they had a huge. The media had a huge story to spin the participants against each other. So I think, given the way in which it was approached, it was inevitable that it would fail.
And staying with you, Nick, I mean, from any business looking at this, we can all see glaring errors that they made. But what would you say the lessons learned for any business should be if they're looking at not setting up a European Super League, but an next big step in their business, big change that they want to make in their business? What advice would you give to them?
Okay, well, so it does actually transpose across to businesses generally, the issue. So having said that, football's like no other business. It is like every other business in respect of one of the issues that has to happen, and that is that when you are engaging in something which is going to result in fundamental change, you have to consult with the key stakeholders who are going to be affected. Obviously, there are issues with some of the clubs involved because they're publicly traded companies. So Manchester United and Juventus can't go around revealing price-sensitive information because I mean the effects of that are pretty obvious. When it was announced on the New York Stock Exchange that United were going to participate, the price of Manchester United went up by $250 million US dollars. So anyone with insider information on that would have made a packet. Likewise, when it got covered in a bucket of water, the stock price duly fell. But that doesn't mean that you can't not have consultation. And what we've got to draw a distinction between is consultation on the one hand, which is informing people about things that might happen, and negotiation, because you don't have to negotiate about this sort of thing. What should have been happening is that there should have been consultation, let's say, with the key stakeholders, and from my perspective, that would have involved the players, the management side of things, and also the the regulators, so certainly the shape of UEFA, and it's perfectly possible to have consultation with the key stakeholders about the fact that the club needs to increase revenue and the reason for it, the options that are open to the club, which appeared to be either to negotiate with UEFA or to possibly consider a breakaway, to question whether or not there would have been support from amongst the players in either situation, and also to ask whether or not the players had suggestions that might have fed into it, and that can be done by that doesn't need to be prefixed by and if we don't get what we want, we're going to jack it all in and break away and set up by ourselves. They could have had informed consultation in precisely the same way that any other business would have informed consultation. Obviously, there was a bit of a problem in that the clubs were all negotiating with UEFA at that point in time with regard to a revamped Champions League. So it made the whole thing even more duplicitous. That's my take from it. That in the same way as other businesses, there should have been consultation.
Excellent. And Charlie, over to you in terms of lessons learned. You're on mute, Charlie.
The classic Zoom error there. I suppose touching on comments actually from both Nick and Brendon, I agree with Brendon that you could have a situation where you wouldn't necessarily even have to get to the point of consulting the fans to understand this was a bad idea. I mean, if you look at people like Liverpool, Kenny Dalglish is a director, Alex Ferguson, Manchester United, conversations with people like this within the business would quickly sort of shape your mindset as to whether this was a good idea or not. People that, I suppose, if you transpose this to another business, people that are more engaged with the customer and understand what the customer wants. What startles me here is that, going back to what I said initially, was the lack of engagement or understanding in what the people within their business, what their stakeholders and their customers wanted. And although you wouldn't necessarily have to ask the fans to sort this out, simple market research would have prevented this. So, the supporters' trusts, they usually have a lot of cooperation with the clubs. They send out regular questionnaires. The clubs could have sent out, as they do, questionnaires at the end of every season to members, and they could have started mooting the idea, even if it wasn't that direct. They could start saying, what changes would you like to see to the Champions League? Would you prefer to see less teams in it, but more regular fixtures? And any of this basic sort of market research would have revealed very quickly that the structure they were looking at and what they wanted to do was not going to be a popular idea.
Excellent. And Brendon, you were telling us before we went live how you're in the middle of planning for next year's Twin Town, getting a plug in for you there. And I mean that there's you leave no stone unturned. There's a huge amount of planning that goes into that, and I think you were telling us that you're now hopefully catapulting towards 150 cars, which is incredible. So in terms of bringing the lessons learned from last week into what you do and what other businesses do, you're saying planning is key.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I was a bit surprised that there wasn't a plan B. The clubs involved didn't have a plan B. Maybe that's not a surprise because they probably weren't that joined up. They were kind of acting independently but together, if that makes sense. I'm sure there's a word for that. And I think in business there would have been a plan B. I think you look at PR disasters, and take an organization like Apple, who have had a few over the years. Apple have a tendency to front things out a little bit, and Steve Jobs, when he was around, would stand up and kind of push back, and there was no pushback from the clubs because of the kind of outpouring of outrage across the nation. I think there are some, as a said earlier that there are some reasons why the clubs would want to see some kind of a revamp, at least of the Champions League, but of European football, and they are mainly logistical. You know, we're talking about Tuesday or Wednesday nights for the clubs to play games in the Champions League. You know, Thursday night in the Europa League, if you've got to play on a Saturday, as occasionally happens, is an absolute nightmare for a team, especially if they're having to go to some far-flung part of Europe to play that game. So I was a little bit surprised about that. But we've all made mistakes. I mean, within my own business, we sold a company called Spire Telecom to what's now Talk Business in 2004, and I cringe when I think back to we were kind of dazzled by the big sums of money that people were talking about, and very quickly signed a document that said we wouldn't disclose any information to anybody ahead of the announcement date by Carphone Warehouse, who were the parent company then. With hindsight, should have pushed back. There were some people I needed to talk to. We had some key partners with whom we had some very awkward conversations the following day, and that was probably my biggest lesson. I hope I've learned it. I think I probably have. I'm a lot wiser now, and certainly in my day job with STL, we occasionally make mistakes. We withdrew a product last year that was probably a bit premature, and we underestimated the pushback we'd get from our customers who weren't ready for change. So the lesson there is, for us, it was to set up user groups, people that use a product or a service, and we take their feedback, but equally, and picking up on what Charlie said, that allows us to feed into those user groups what might be coming down the road, and maybe enthuse them about an alternative product before we actually launch it.
And you referenced earlier about what you feel could happen next, and our friend Gary Neville said that it could have been the end of football as we know it. What are your predictions, Brendon, starting with you, for football going forward now, and how it will look over the next 5-10 years?
I think this will go away for a while, and I mean, certainly if you listen to Perez at Real Madrid, he's not saying it's going to go away anytime soon, but I think it will quieten down. I think the politicians and various other people in the UK were quick to jump on the back of this for two reasons, really. One politician in particular is short of a bit of good news at the moment, so to jump on the back of football is a relatively easy thing to do. I'm a bit skeptical of the Gary Nevilles and the people like that, because again, social media is massive for them. Their personal brand is really important, and so I do get a little bit skeptical about that. I do think, whether we like it or not, there'll be a bit of change, but in a positive kind of way. It won't be the death of English football, because if you read a lot of the statements and the kind of outcry that we heard from fans, people were talking in terms of going to watch Salford City or another local side. If that happened, and I don't think it will, that would be a good thing. The other thing I would say, really, just in closing on that point, is as football fans, and I include myself, we're quite fickle. So Man City, great result in Paris last night. Man City fans won't be talking about the ESL; they'll be talking about the result in Paris. There were one or two other clubs involved, and I don't want to alienate any fans, but who won't be enjoying any success. So this, frankly, is all their fans have got to talk about between now and the end of the season.
And and I understand your point of view on that, whether the Man City fans are up yet or not. I'm sure they've had a heavy night. But Charlie, one thing that Perez said was why football had to do this in the face of uncontrollable variables such as the next generation now not so engaged in football, the rise of esports. And I read something the other day, which I think referenced in our briefing, about how the World Cup statistics could be quite quickly eclipsed by esport attendances. Of all of us here, you're probably the youngest. So what do you think the future of football has in store with things like the rise of esports?
I think it's a very good question, and although I'm the youngest and possibly not young enough to be engaged with those that are playing esports over watching it. I think there's definitely, I think society as it is today, I even feel it in myself and become less patient. And, like, even if I'm sitting watching a game of football now, if it's not United, then I might be looking at my phone. I might be doing something else at the same time. I might be on WhatsApp. And I think there's a need for an instant buzz more with the younger generation. So yes, maybe there's a risk there. But at the same time, football has lasted forever, and I personally, I'm skeptical of these. I'm sure there may be statistics to back it up. You've got to remember that during lockdown, for the last 12 months, we've been watching football in empty stadiums, which isn't as good. Even on TV, it's not as good. Every game has been televised, so it's becoming more readily available. It's the same concept, really, of I'm a Man United fan, but I don't want to watch United play Real Madrid every week. I want to know that when Man United play Real Madrid, this is a once in a, I'm not going to get this opportunity again. That's why I go to the game. It might be 5 years, 10 years until it happens again. So I don't personally think football will ever be overtaken by esports. I think the dangers, going back to what Brendon said about the Champions League, I'm absolutely staggered that, I hoped this European Super League, when I first heard about it, I hoped it was all a ploy to try and put pressure on UEFA to change the Champions League structure in the right direction. And instead, they've gone and done the opposite. And once again, as a Manchester United supporter, if Manchester United don't get in the top four, I hope they don't get into the Europa League. I don't actually want the Europa League. It's more games that makes everything else harder, makes them less likely to succeed. And instead, they'll be flying to Kazakhstan to play a team I've never heard of, probably put out a second team and lose, which they did do last year, I think. And the Champions League is increasingly becoming like the Europa Part 2. I don't want 10 teams in the group. I don't want United flying around Europe playing teams that no one in the world wants them to see apart from that village. So I don't think it's gone away forever. I think it's been mulling for a while. And my concern is that when it does come back, it will be more organised. And in an era of globalisation of football, with potential 39 fixtures in the Premier League being held in the United States, increased World Club Cups, I think we will see a greater international aspect in club football, personally, which is not what I want.
That's clear. Interesting.
Just to add into that very quickly, Richard, I think that the TV issue is a massive issue, not just at that level, but I've been watching Oxford United games on something called iFollow, which anyone who follows an EFL club will be aware of. And it's whilst it's an embryonic service and it's quite basic, it's good enough for me. Cup of tea and pull up a chair on a Saturday afternoon. It means I'm not leaving the house at 1 o'clock and I'm not getting back at 6:30 or anything like that. I can, football takes place between 3 and 5 o'clock really for me now, and that's a much better use of my time.
Are you distracted by WhatsApp like Charlie is when watching Man United, or is the player a bit more engaged?
No, Richard, it's not when I'm watching United, it's when I'm watching Chelsea.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, good luck tonight against Roma. I mean that sincerely. Nick, over to you, if you can close on what your thoughts are really with the future of football. Okay,
so in terms of the Super League and the washout from that, I think there's a few things that are going to happen. So first off, I don't think we're finished with the bloodletting in relation to the executives at the clubs. Their board's gone, but I think there's a good chance that others may yet still follow. And the reason for that is that there was a lot of people involved in sitting across tables from other executives in the Premier League and the Champions League, and essentially being duplicitous and taking confidential information and possibly using that to their own benefit. So query whether or not there would have been tortious interference claims, whether or not there would have been constructive trustee claims if the whole thing had gone ahead. But in any event, it seems to me that there are issues as regards those individuals with the owners and directors test. And if you look at the Football Association's view on that, the idea behind it is to meet standards greater than that required under law, so as to protect the reputation and image of the game. And on any analysis, I think the reputation and image of the game has taken absolute battering as a result of this. Other points: could there be a formal regulator coming in? Well, possibly. Regulators are what they are. Other public regulators that you look at, there is a query as to whether or not any of them actually have any teeth. Why would football be any different? In connection with the possible move to the German 50% plus one type ownership rule, do I think that's likely? Absolutely not. That just isn't going to happen. And the reason for that is there's Article 1 on the European Convention on Human Rights, so that's the right to respect for property, and you'd be expropriating the owners of the clubs for no particular reason. It also sends out the wrong message that the UK government would jump on a passing bandwagon and change the law in relation to something which is essentially a private matter between the clubs in the Premier League. So I don't think that's going to happen. Quite frankly, the government's actually got better things to do with its time at the moment. That bandwagon has already gone. Finally, will it all come back round again? Well, possibly. This is the where we are now. Is that the whole thing, going back to what Brendon and Charlie have already indicated, is driven by money, and it's television money. And one of the problems that the clubs have got is that most of them don't actually make any money, in spite of the huge sums that are being generated from professional football. Real Madrid and Barcelona are at or around $1 billion in debt. With the Italians, the Inter Milan are owned by Chinese owners who are looking to sell. AC Milan are owned by a vulture fund, and it's quite well known that as regards the UK clubs, they're in the case of Arsenal and Tottenham, they need money. They've got huge club infrastructure debts to deal with as a result of the new stadium they've got. So will it come back? Well, at the moment, where we are is that in spite of the duplicity that's gone on with the whole project, the clubs have actually got about 75% of what they were after as a result of the expanded Champions League. There are going to be more games, they're going to get more revenue out of it, and as a result of the so-called UEFA coefficient, which is essentially how many times historically you've played in Europe, there will be a backdoor into Europe if the clubs finish high enough up the Premier League table. So at the moment, do I think there is a necessity for it to happen? No, I don't. Do I think that it could come back? Yes, I do, because the problem is that as more money comes into the game, it goes out on players' wages, and until such time as there's something like a salary cap that's introduced, that's going to carry on being the case. So if it does come back, what I think everyone's learned from this is that the whole thing will have to be better thought through and hopefully done after a bit of consultation.
It seems that all the models that they come up with, it just seems what's the best model we can come up with to help get Arsenal into the and it seems like it's gradually dawning on Arsenal fans that the only way that they can get a tune out of that team is to be taken over by Spotify. So so in your lifetime, Charlie, we'll have Facebook Man City, Amazon Man United, and Spotify Arsenal. Gents, it's been great to catch up with you all. I really appreciate your time. Good luck with your respective teams for the rest of the season. I mean that sincerely in some cases, mainly in Brendon's. But
no, I've got a soft spot for QPR. I quite like going to Loftus Road when you can go to games. So.
It's not called Loftus Road anymore, Brendon.
Well, yeah, true.
Excellent. Good to catch up with you all. Thanks very much for your time. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Well,